Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios, welcome to this week's first episode of The Watchdog. Here's what we have in store for you this evening. South Africa takes its climate ambitions, hopes and aspirations to the world, hoping to influence the biggest and most important meeting of world nations. We take you there, and we're going to hear from people who will be negotiating on behalf of this country.
Actually lay criminal charges against state institutions. Now you know what the law says, who takes responsibility.
We'll also take you to the province of KwaZulu-Natal, where some of the country's leading minds in the public service, leading academics, business people and activists are gathering to look at whether the state does in fact have the capacity to deliver on the country's development blueprint, and that's the 10-year-old National Development Plan.
Any prior leadership who criticize their successors, to me, are in the wrong. That's my starting point.
And with things heating up in the ANC ahead of its elective conference, we look at the latest pronouncements by some of the party's leaders and how they are trying to shape conversations in the lead up to the December gathering. All that coming up in tonight's episode of the Watchdog, which starts right now.
Humanity has a choice: cooperate or perish. It is either a climate solidarity pact or a collective suicide pact. Excellencies, this UN climate conference is a reminder that the answer is in our hands. And the clock is ticking. We are in the fight of our lives and we are losing. Greenhouse gas emissions keep growing. Global temperatures keep rising, and our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible.
And that, of course, is the chief of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, opening the COP27 gathering. Soon thereafter, President Cyril Ramaphosa let the world in on what South Africa thinks of the gathering of world nations and what it would want to see coming out of it. A few hours ago, the president addressed a closed session of a high-level roundtable on just transition, which he also co-chaired. And from remarks of his release afterwards, he bemoaned the fact that although Africa and small island states carry the least responsibility for climate change, they experience much of its harshest effects. Extreme weather like floods and droughts are driving food insecurity, displacing populations, causing damage to infrastructure and leading to the loss of livelihoods. A starting point for the conference, the president said, will be for all parties to honor their undertakings and commitments in line with the guiding principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. Desigan Naidu is a member of the Presidential Climate Commission. He joins us on the line. Desigan, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. In a nutshell, of course, I still remember what the president had to say on Friday, giving the commission its marching orders. But foremost in the minds of the South African delegation is what, if you had to put it in a couple of sentences?
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to your listeners, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about this incredibly important subject. The South African position, and it's in sync with the African position, it is in sync with the G77 and China position, has the following priorities. Number one, we do need the world to accelerate to limiting its carbon emissions. We cannot go further into the suicide pact, as Antonio Guterres put it, or as another delegate put it today. We can't continue to invest in our own extinction. Number two, it costs a lot of money to make this transition. It costs the developing world money, it costs the developing world more money than it currently has, and we are calling on one, the developed world to honor its pact of that $100 billion that it had promised to help the South to organize for this transition to a low carbon economy. But we need to increase that number tenfold, 100-fold, for us to be able to do this successfully. The third issue on the table that's very firmly there is that we are already experiencing the devastating impacts of climate change. We need help to adapt, to create coping capacity in the South, to be able to deal with these extreme weather events and loss and damage, as we know in this country and many other parts of the world, to make sure that our folk are managing to live day by day in these devastating times. And finally, we need to organize for a just way in which we transition from our current high carbon economy in the world to a low carbon economy.
Let's start with the money. Does it look like, from what you're able to pick up on the ground, from statements that have already been made, whatever intelligence you may have been able to gather, does it look like the developed world will in fact honor the commitments that they made?
You know, that answer is no longer black and white. I think the part that is clear is that there's going to be further limitations on official development assistance. In fact, given the recession, the brink of recession that most of the world is currently facing, and the big economies are particularly tight, we're not going to see too much more money. In fact, we might see less money coming out of official development aid. However, there is a lot of innovation at play. And that innovation is about how we bring together the ODA money together with private finance, together with sovereign funds and concessional loans and other development assistance that's outside the official package in order to make this work. And there's a great example on the table right now, and that is South Africa's own Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, where there is this pledge of $8.5 billion, most of it in the form of loans rather than grants, but way below the market rates, and other innovative mechanisms to unlock private sector investment, as we are doing in South Africa around our renewable energy work in the REAP program, that might get us over the edge in a smart enough way.
Way below market rates, perhaps, but it's still a lot of money, other people have argued.
It is a fair argument. I mean, increasing your debt is never a good idea, but it really is important what you use the debt to do. And what we are trying to do with this particular package in South Africa is invest in our energy security precisely because we need to grow the economy. The economy is ailing on the back of the energy poverty that we are currently dealing with, and it is something that will take us down further on a slippery slope, and we have to make a U-turn on that in a very smart way. And if we're using the debt finance in order to increase our ability not only to pay the debt back, but also to grow the economy and bring more people into the economy, and I mean very directly taking people out of unemployment, out of struggling livelihoods, into the domain of enterprise development, then we would be doing the right thing. But of course, there are important choices that need to be made and stuck to if we go on that pathway.
There, of course, are those who also point out that even though, yes, I mean, the energy poverty situation we, in particular, are finding ourselves in also has a lot to do with our own failings, with our own inability to plan properly and, you know, do the necessary things that we ought to have done perhaps decades ago.
And that is precisely correct. And I don't think there's any argument about that anymore. I think all of the players that have been part of that decision-making timeline have all admitted that we clearly needed to do a lot more, a lot sooner. And that is a grim reality. But we are where we are. And we have to organize to pull up our socks and move in the right direction. And the right direction is around high energy security, but on the back of a majority renewables energy base. And I think this part is really, really pivotal. Technically, it is possible for South Africa to get that energy security on the back of fossil fuels. it would be the wrong choice. And it would be the wrong choice because as the world organizes itself into a lower carbon economy, our own ability to do business with the rest of the world will diminish very, very significantly, because people will be judging on the basis of what your emissions profiles are before they buy your product. And the product that we're talking about is not only going to be sold on the markets in foreign lands, that international market is on our own supermarket shelves as we speak, and that's where those choices are going to be made. We have to be not only get rapidly to a low carbon economy, but in order to be competitive, we need to get there faster than our competitors.
Of course, I mean, as the president pointed out, I think it was on Friday, our Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, as much as it may be as innovative as you were saying earlier that it is, and this is perhaps an example of what can be done, it is way, way, way below what we actually need.
No, that's precisely correct. I mean, the front end of the deal, this $8.5 billion, is supposed to be catalytic. It is supposed to catalyze the 10 times more that we need in the 5-year term. We need a kind of $90 billion deal, a 1.5 trillion rand deal in order to organize for the short-term transition. And as we go further into that, it would obviously cost a lot more. The bulk at the moment is around dealing with electricity, and electricity is the biggest part of the package. And I think most South Africans would agree it is the right prioritization for now. But closely behind that, we're talking about the transport transformation in the country to new energy vehicles, meaning primarily electric vehicles, but other options also exist. And then the other part is taking advantage of one of our core assets in this country, and that's the platinum asset that we have, in order to fuel up a green hydrogen economy. And this is where we would really get into the domain of prosperity. And this is something to look forward to. But it does mean that all along that way, we have to continue to make very brave choices. And it can't stop in the domain of policy. We have to put the money where it matters, get the people where it matters, get the technology where it matters, and build the capacity that we need in order for us to make this work going into the future.
Now, this investment plan, as the president said, is, well, first of its kind, he said, but I mean, in both scale and ambition. But to what extent, though, is it still dependent, or is it going to be dependent as well on the conversations that kicked off in Egypt today?
It will, because, I mean, what Egypt is going to do is it's going to set up the mood around the investment. And I think this is really critical. I mean, one of the things that the presidency, the Egyptian presidency, which started off today, actually, and the COP president, Shukri, was quite clear. He said that they're looking at Sharm el-Sheikh, at COP27, as a transformative moment in climate action. And a big part of that is inviting much higher levels of confidence in investing in an economy that will be low carbon going into the future. And this is not only for our own existential reasons to continue to be around as human beings, which is important enough, I guess. But the future of the global economy, if we're looking at any kind of reasonable growth going into the future, has to be on a low carbon base. There is no alternative to that. And we're rapidly seeing both public finance institutions as well as private finance institutions responding to this very positively. With the World Bank, we see the World Bank investing in something called the CCDR, the Climate Change Diagnostic Report, as one of their new tools to assess the risk profiles of different countries that they want to give loans and aid to, and aid in development. We're also seeing private sector players like big banks saying that we will honor the contracts we currently have, but no more brown energy projects. that all new projects that we fund in the energy domain will have to be green energy projects. So we're already seeing this giant tanker turning around in the right direction. We need to give it the momentum at COP27 so that we can really derive benefit from this going into the future.
Dasigan Naidu, let me thank you so much for your time and insights.
Thank you very much for your...
He is, of course, a member of the Presidential Climate Commission. After the break, we take you to the province of KwaZulu-Natal, where some of the country's leading minds in the public service, academia, business people and activists are gathering to look at whether the state does in fact have the capacity to deliver on the country's development blueprint, and that's the 10-year-old National Development Plan. Acting Public Protector Advocate Koleka Galega says the Chapter 9 institution is working on amending legislation governing its work, and this is to criminalize the failure to implement its recommendations. Speaking at a conference on the National Development Plan and state capacity at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, Galega said the amendments follow on the Nkandla judgment by the Constitutional Court, which ruled it was mandatory to implement recommendations by the Public Protector.
The conference, hosted by the University School of Built Environment and Development Studies, will focus on service delivery, administration, policy making and the performance of the first 10 years of the National Development Plan. The Public Protector's Office says the lack of ethical leadership translates directly into poor public service delivery.
There's no strong show of a political will. We speak of Chapter 9, 10 and 13 institutions of being the vanguards of our democracy, but when we speak of issues of reforming our governance into good governance, we do not take the work done by these institutions.
The Ombudsman of the state says it is in the process of amending a section of the Public Protector Act. This will enable the institution to subpoena individuals and lay charges against those at the helm of state institutions.
We will actually lay criminal charges against state institutions. Now you know what the law says, who takes responsibility. The state institution is a juristic person, but they can be charged, and we've seen that in some of the cases. And those of you who are entrusted with that power must then take the responsibility. So we need to give effect to the development of the jurisprudence through the Nkandla judgment, and by doing so we need to amend our act. But also, Director General, the impunity has grown much more, and therefore should the fight against corruption and maladministration.
But she says there is little accountability and very few prosecutions and convictions.
Our state does not correct. It sits with the rot year in and year out, and more of the times we duplicate investigations. We've got investigations we've done in 2010. We get the same misconduct 10 years later. We need to go through the same investigation to give out the same result, which will again not be implemented.
The conference is also shining the spotlight on corruption and cadre deployment, which is said to hamper the state's capacity. The Deputy Minister of Public Service, Dr. Chana Pilane Majake, however, disputed that cadre deployment existed in government departments.
I'm sure you've heard in the public discourse people talking about cadre deployment, to the extent that one would actually have an impression that government actually goes out to go and hire people who belong to the ruling party in government offices. And for those that come from government offices, for now, I want you to produce the African National Congress membership cards to prove that. What I'm saying, this is not the case. There are policies, rules and regulations for appointment, recruitment and selection of public servants within public service.
The controversial issue, however, was slammed by the Zondo Commission as a key enabler of state capture, and Cabinet has recently adopted a policy framework which would see it move away from cadre deployment. Jade Paulser, SABC News. Durban.
People leading conversations at that three-day gathering include the Director General of the Department of Public Service and Administration, and that's Ms. Yoliso Makasi. Professor Mashupie Maserumule is a Professor of Public Affairs at the Tshwane University of Technology. Good evening to both of you. Thank you so much for your time.
Good evening. Good evening.
I'm going to start with you, Ms. Makasi, just taking us back to why you all felt it was necessary to have this gathering.
Thank you, Vuyo, and good evening to the listeners. Well, this conference, we've conceptualized it over a period of time. The idea is really to review how far we have gone in terms of implementation of the NDP. It started as a focus on the chapter that deals with state capacity, which is chapter 13. But I think with the papers that we have received and proposals that we have received from our partners, we are now covering a wide range of issues beyond chapter 13. So the idea is to review how far we have gone. We are, we are left with 8 years to 2030, and also in reviewing how far we have gone, learn our lessons from some of the data that we have generated in terms of the implementation that we have done in order to improve our policy making in support of the NDP recommendations, as well as in order to improve implementation, and also just have a tighter program action plan that we come up with on what will we be doing in the next 8 years, what are the areas that we need to fast track in terms of implementation and focus on, and what impact are we looking at. So this is the whole idea over this three-day conference. We have partners like the National Planning Commission, currently represented by Prof. We have the University of KZN that is also partnering. We have the provincial government in KZN that is also partnering. We have a number of other partners. I may not be able to mention all of them by now, but we've received lots of support in terms of hosting this conference in KZN. Thank you.
Are you though not repeating something that has already been done? I do remember, like after the inauguration of the new commission, we had here on the program the deputy leader of the commission. And Prof was saying, look, I mean, let's admit, not much has actually been done. I remember asking him what this commission, the new commission, newly appointed, was then going to do. And I remember him saying something like, you've got to trust us. These are capable South Africans who are really taking on this task with everything that they can master. So my point is, has that exercise, which is saying this particular gathering is going to is busy with, not something that has in fact already been done?
Not really. It has not been done. Look, the National Planning Commission does its own reviews in terms of implementation, and we have, I think it's the 2020 report that has come out of the review processes. And the Commission, we have lots of engagement with them around the areas that require improvement. What is most important about this conference is that we've been able to bring in the implementers, because the implementers have the evidence that we require to understand where do we need to improve. So we're bringing in the implementers, which are the officials in government. We're bringing in researchers. We are bringing in academics, and we're even bringing in policymakers just to learn from each other what's working well and where do we need to improve. So it is not in any way a duplication of that process. We are actually building on the work that they have done. And remember, Vuyo, that our focus, as much as we are reviewing how far we have gone, our focus is on the next 28 years. I mean, next 8 years. What outcomes do we want to come with? And how are we going to monitor that we are achieving these outcomes so that we don't come back 8 years later and say we have not achieved some of the key things that we need to achieve. So it's a progress report, if you like, but beyond that, to plan into the future, how do we ensure that we deliver on the things that we need to deliver in terms of the NDP, but also what are the other emerging issues that we must take into consideration as we deliver.
Prof, I'm looking at some of the issues that the acting public protector raised, the political will is one of them. She also asserts that impunity has grown much more. And I remember, I mean, we've had the Public Service Commission's a chairperson here on the program the past couple of times that they issued or they released their quarterly report. And in fact, those reports speak to same, if not similar issues that the Public Protector was raising.
Thank you so much, Vio, once more, and good evening to your viewers as well. I think the issues that the Acting Public Protector raised indeed are critically important. If you go to the National Development Plan, it does put emphasis on the significance of leadership. And in the context of what the Public Protector said, she put more emphasis on political will. And political will is a function of political leadership. And to that extent, I think what she did was to essentially challenge the political leadership of the state to say that there are significant issues that are emerging from the reports, and therefore those issues had to be acted upon, and that they are in the forefront in terms of the leadership of the state. It ought to start with them. They ought to also demonstrate exemplary ethical leadership in terms of making sure that they are committed to do the right thing. So the Public Protector, the Acting Public Protector was spot on, but at the same time also, I think she was talking to all of us, even in society, because we are leading society in our different capacity, that we should, all of us, be exemplary in terms of making sure that we turn around things in this country. We make sure that we really commit ourselves towards ensuring that this country works for the good of everybody. So, yeah, the issue that the Public Protector raised are critically important.
Well, I mean, Prof, you know, I mean, I was listening to, I'm sure you heard the Deputy Minister speaking there, talking about cadre deployment and insisting that it doesn't exist. Now, you will recall that, I mean, there were various testimonies from, among other people, the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, who admitted that, I mean, there's a deployment structure in the ANC and things have happened. It did suggest that there were no rules there. And so no one gave us any clear idea as to how that structure functions. But the fact of the matter is that it does exist. Now, when you get such, I mean, denials, one wonders then whether, in fact, there is a recognition, certainly among politicians, that wrongs need to be corrected, and to deny you know, reality is an injustice. In fact, it goes against the exercise Ms. Makasi is talking about.
Look, I think largely what the Deputy Minister was emphasizing was the technical process which is being followed within the state in terms of recruitment and selection. But I need to concur with you, Vio, that even when you go back to case law, you'll remember that there were certain practices within the state which were found not really consistent with the late clearly articulated technical process of recruitment and selection as clearly articulated in law. You'll recall that one of the famous cases related to that, I think, is that of Mlokoti in the Eastern Cape, for the position of a municipal manager, where it was quite clear in terms of evidence that was presented before the court of law that he did perform exceptionally well. However, he wasn't taken, So that practice in itself contradicted a clearly articulated merit-based processes of appointing people within the state. So the point that I'm trying to emphasize here is that, yes, indeed, there were certain instances of infraction, particularly as they related to merit-based process which ought to be followed in appointing and promoting people within the state. The moment when you act against that, you are acting against the law. So these are some of the things that need to be emphasized, because laws have actually been created for a purpose. And by the way, also, on the very same issue that we are talking about, remember, the question of a merit-based approach in terms of appointments, promotion, or any other human resource practices within the state. It was one of the 34 principles that the multi-party negotiating process agreed upon in the foundation of our democracy. Okay. And it has consistently been emphasized that the type of the public service that we need for the purpose of driving our post-apartheid South Africa, it ought to be that which is so professionalized. It has been consistently emphasized. And fundamental principle to achieve a professional public service are there. You go to chapter 10 of our Constitution. Okay, those principles are there.
Okay, and what Prof is talking about, Ms. Makasi, is of course also, a big part of it is what the acting Minister of Public Service and Administration, as well as the chairperson of the Public Service Commission, and that's Dr. Fikeni, spoke about. I think it was over a week ago when they held that briefing in Parliament. The question is, are we going to move with speed in implementing these reforms? Because the criticism, as you know, over the years has been that we are always capable of putting policies in place and talking about these things, but without acting on them.
We are just firstly on the issue of cadre deployment now. From a technical, I can't deal with this issue in a political manner, but in a technical manner. And I can speak about the public service, national and provincial government appointments, because that's the area of responsibility that I can account for. And I just want to assure you, and anybody who's watching this show, and refer back to the court papers that we have lodged as DPSA on this particular matter, that there is no process in our recruitment for director generals, for deputy director generals, and for anyone in the public service that refers us to a cadre deployment policy of a political party. We are guided by the Constitution, we are guided by the Public Service Act, and each and every submission that we submit to Cabinet to consider for an appointment of a DG, because those submissions come through DPSA, an appointment of a DDG in national government, there is no interface at a technical level which you are responsible for with any political party cadre deployment policy. You can refer back to our papers for further details on these matters. The last question, the other question that you are raising, certainly for us, these things are urgent. Already, I think about 60 or 70% of issues that are in the national, in the professionalization plan as approved, the framework as approved by Cabinet, there is already actions in motion to achieve some of those issues that are recommendations, like the issue of integrity assessments of recruitment. There is work that we are currently undertaking to ensure that the idea of integrity assessment into recruitment of public service is built in and is implemented. There's a lot of work that the National School of Government is doing, the Public Service Commission is doing, and other partners who are involved in this work. So these matters are urgent, and we are fully aware, and we are on the ball. We are implementing. We are doing a lot around. This conference is part of this work that we are doing to ensure implementation of this particular framework, because the challenges of an unprofessional public service, we can see them, and where we can save the situation, we are working very hard with public servants around these particular matters.
Okay. Let me thank both of you very much for your time this evening. Ms. Yoliswa Makasu is the Director General of the Public Service and Administration Department, as well as Professor Mashupie Maserumule, who is a Public Affairs Professor at the Tshwane University of Technology. To this now, former ANC President Jacob Zuma says the party's leadership contestation is threatening the existence of the liberation movement. He was delivering a memorial lecture in honor of Oliver Tambo at Umlazi in Durban. He lashed out at what he called a new and unusual character of contestation for the presidency of the party.
A warm welcome for the former president in Umlazi's J section. Zuma, who earlier announced that he was making himself available to be elected as chairperson of the ANC, made no mention of his own aspirations. He has, however, expressed concern that the party suffered a lot of damage during the 2017 National Elective Conference, where he said 7 members of the ANC contested for the position of president. He says this weakens the ANC and the leadership, and he called on the party to address the issue.
We have also witnessed foreign tendencies in the manner in which the leadership contest was conducted, and that has also not been discussed. That is a major issue for the ANC and its revival and strength, and needs to be prioritized for discussions in the coming conference. At Nazareth in 2017, it was for the first time that we had huge sums of money being used to buy delegates to vote in a particular way. There were clear allegations made that Cyril Ramaphosa, who was contesting the presidency, used a lot of money to buy his position as president of the ANC.
He also called for the party's policy resolutions and decisions to be implemented, and he said that failure to do this was not even discussed by the leadership. He also added that the time has come for the ANC to correct the way it was being run, and that the party should renew its focus on liberating the millions of marginalized South Africans. Londe Khatebe, SABC News, Umlazi.
Well, clearly the noises are getting louder, the gloves are coming off, the sense of desperation is palpable. Of course, ANC factions trying to outmaneuver each other ahead of the party's December elective conference. We thought as a new week starts, we look at some of the events of this past weekend, that which you saw there being one of them. No doubt, these events, speeches, comments meant to influence conversations ahead of not only the December conference, but all processes leading up to that elective conference, including what's coming up this weekend, which is the meeting of the party's national executive. Well, to help us navigate some of these issues, I'm joined by Professors Lesiba Tefo and Beki Mngomezulu. Evening to both of you. Thank you so much for your time. I'm curious just what each one of you made of what we played, the highlights we played there from that speech that the former president gave. Professor Tefo?
Yes, offside the comments made by the former head of state. You asked me to comment on that.
Yes,
okay,
that's what you made.
But yeah, all right. Thanks, Vuyo. But I'm more interested in making a comment on what was said prior to what the former President Zuma said. You know, you are not going to win as a country if you keep lying to yourself and you don't deal with issues that matter. When you listen to a minister, a deputy minister, and a director general contradicting the head of state, cadre deployment, which is what brought this country into this morass we find ourselves in. The head of state conceded that cadre deployment must be revised. Whatever jargon you want to use, he considered that much. But this wants us to believe. Hence, I talk at one level that the ANC has gone too far in the wrong direction. It can no longer redeem itself from itself. I mean, when you talk cadre deployment, it starts even in the executive of Ramaphosa. How many wise Indians and colors are there, vis-a-vis those who were there in Mandela and Mbeki? Go to the universities. White people, colors and Indian no longer apply for executive positions because they know they are a preserve and a reserve for a certain group of people. Let's be fair and honest. And for the sake of our children, let's teach them the right things. The truth must have no any other premium but itself as the truth. Sorry, but let me come back to former head of state. He said the things that we all know, and then sins of incumbency. He was part of that. He fell into that trap. Like all liberation movement, at least they've had their day. I said it then, I can repeat myself. Liberation movements last for 20 years. After that, they stay on by hook or by crook. They lost their luster. They lost their moral compass 15, 20 years ago. And there's no way, there's no amount of rhetoric or jargon that is even archaic and inimical to what is going on that can influence the people of South Africa. They are much wiser than they were in 1994, and they know where they are headed. And let's hope indeed, in 2024, they will accept that they must chart a new trajectory because the future is in their hands. And to that end, it is the Electoral Act that will assist and precipitate the process towards the redemption of the country from this precipice.
For you, Professor Mngomezulu?
No, thank you very much, Vio. No, the reality of the matter is we are not where we're supposed to be, and there are a number of reasons why we've derailed. Amongst them is the fact that when we entered this new political dispensation, we had our high hopes that things were going to change for the better. And the euphoria that engulfed the country in 1994 and on the build-up to the 1994 general election has subsequently dissipated for a number of reasons. One of which, of course, is what we've been talking about all along, the issue of corruption, the issue of a leadership deficit, and of course, moving away from even the policies and the principles that have guided the ANC over the years. So the caliber of leaders that we have today cannot be compared to the caliber of leaders that we had in yesteryears. Right now, we focus on personalities. During elections, we focus on character assassination, and then we also focus on being economical with the truth. And then, of course, the end result is that the image of the organization is disappearing. As you might have seen, what has been happening in the subsequent election, the most recent ones being the general election in 2019 and then the local government election in 2021. But truth be told, we are talking about the ANC only because it is the governing party. Look at the opposition political parties. Have they succeeded in using the space that the ANC has created for them? My answer is no, because if they'd done that, they will be capitalizing on that. What we saw happening in 2021 was not just a voter apathy as people might have expected, whereby people will decide, okay, we're sick and tired of the ANC, we're going to vote for the DA, we're going to vote for the EFF. It didn't happen that way. People said we are not going to vote because they had a belief that the ANC, some still believe that the ANC is the liberation movement, which is what it is, and they believe that it can save itself. But as Prof. Tefo is saying that at the moment, it's very difficult because there is no intention even to repent. You know, Mandela once said that if you call me a saint, you are assuming that I'm a sinner who keeps on repenting. But are we repenting as a nation? Is the ANC repenting? I'm not too sure.
You know, Professor Tefo, I mean, reading the Sunday Times yesterday, you may have seen the remarks by former President Kgalema Motlanthe talking about the situation that the man Jacob Zuma was also criticizing in that insert is in, and how he feels that you know, he still needs to, you know, come straight with South Africans, you know, take us into his confidence, because he too, you know, is now caught in this Phala saga, which doesn't seem, it doesn't look like it's going to go away. Do you think that former President Jacob Zuma, in his remarks, is sensing a vulnerability on the part of Cyril Ramaphosa, and both him and everyone else who doesn't want, him and everyone else who doesn't want them are now going to go for broke come the next few weeks? And what we saw at the weekend was, if not the beginning, or at least a continuation of that.
Look, I heard former heads of state saying a few things about the incumbent, but I looked at them and I'd say, they are not holier than thou. Perhaps Motlanthe can give him that, given that the limited days he stayed in office. Talk to the Zimbabweans about Thabo Mbeki and their plight today. They will tell you, had he not supported, right, unreservedly, Robert Mugabe, they wouldn't be where they are. And even South Africa would be better off than it is right now. Then you have President Zuma, right? And you know how much happened on his watch. And Ramaphosa, Nkandla is Phala, and Nkandla is what the Phala is. So all of them, I think they did their bit. They must just accept that the sun has set for them as individuals and also for the ruling party. That a new cadre, either from within their own movement or from outside, it should emerge, not for anybody else or for anything else, but for the sake of the country. But unfortunately, I'm talking to you, Vuyo, as a non-politician, and it's easy for me to punt these things. But for them, it's always about power. And people say, I cannot imagine, I get traumatized when I think about the ANC losing power in 2024. And I say, I am more traumatized by what is going to the country and what is happening to the color of the national flag, what is happening to the constitution that is and was an embodiment of the aspiration of the people of the land. I can understand that there was money used, but who didn't use money in 2017? Let's be clear. Let's not be unduly unfair to Ramaphosa, right? And even now, as we are speaking, I think there are only stacks and stacks of money being prepared for the branches. Hence, Motlanthe said, can you declare and be open and transparent as your campaign? This is an acknowledgement, right? Inadvertently, perhaps, that money is being used and it is going to be used. And I can allude to that, that unless they do something about it, they are telling the people of the land that if you don't have deep pockets, you'll never be head of state. Hence my appeal that let's, in a meaningful way, change the Electoral Act, that even a son or a daughter of a sharecropper, without any penny in his or her pocket, but if he has the wherewithal to lead us, we would elect and we should elect.
Prof. Ngomezulu, you know, I mean, a clip we're going to play, but which we can't play now because of time issues. Gwede Mandashe criticizes former heads of state for criticizing the incumbent. Is he right?
No, that is hypocrisy. I won't mince my words on that one. It's hypocrisy. Because you recall what happened when the current president assumed power, and then he went to Davos, not even in the country, he was in Davos, Switzerland, and then he started complaining about the so-called 9 lost years. I'm one of the people who made a statement asking a question, where was he during the 9 lost years? Was he not the deputy president of the ANC? Was he not the deputy president of the country? If there were 9 lost years, then it means he must have been part of it. And then secondly, I said constitutionally, if you are the deputy president of the country, you are the leader of government business. So which means that everything that happens in government should start with you, and then eventually you will then report to your president, and then the cabinet will decide, and so on and so forth. So the reality of the matter is, what we have seen the former heads of state doing is not something new. What I'm worried about is the manner in which some members of the ANC and some leaders of the ANC have responded. Because one would have expected that when the current president in fact accused his predecessor in public, we should as a nation have reacted, but we kept silent. And only now that we are complaining after former President Mbeki, former President Zuma, and then former interim President Motlanthe are criticizing the president. Then we are saying, no, there are internal structures in the ANC, they must use them. Where were those structures when the president attacked his predecessor? So there is basically hypocrisy that is happening here, and I agree with Prophet for that there is something wrong that has happened, and unfortunately we are perpetuating it instead of changing the tune and then doing things differently.
Professor, for Ms. Linda Sulu, in an interview with the SABC, says President Ramaphosa should also step aside. And I don't think it was a coincidence, her saying that, days before the next meeting of the National Executive Committee of the ANC.
You see, the likes of Madame Sisulu are the people I like most, because look, don't be reductionist in your approach. I think she's basing that on a principled position taken by the ANC. And as usual, they don't process these things, take them out perhaps out of emotions and sentiments at the time, only to reflect later and even seek the intervention of the court to help them understand their own resolutions. Look, if Sisulu is honest, and indeed, I would want to believe she is, let her go out and look her friends, her colleagues in cabinet and say, guys, let's go. I know she's less tainted when it comes to corruption, I can grant her that. But let her go and look her colleagues in parliament. Let them also step aside with Ramaphosa. I wonder how many would remain there, including non-executive members. Let's be honest, not many of them are worthy of being in that hallowed building we call a parliament. If you don't know, Will, I'll remind you of the big madam who once said to all and sundry, look me in the eye and I'll tell you, all of you, you have smaller Nyana skeletons in the process.
In the cover. Quick last word from you, Prof. Ngomezulu, on that same matter.
No, I think that the context is very critical. It's just that the timing is of essence. Had these issues that were articulated by Minister Lindiwe Sisulu come earlier than now, then of course they would have been taken seriously. The problem is that they are happening on the eve of an election. So people are most likely to say that she's making these statements because she's also vying for the position. But putting that aside, if we look at the content of what she's saying, there are a couple of issues. One, we have a legal issue. And then 2, we have a moral issue. And then 3, we have a political issue. So in terms of the resolution of the ANC, it says that you can only step aside once you've been formally charged. I've made this statement when talking about juxtaposing the president and Dr. Zweli Mkhize. When people were asking me a question, why would the delegates vote for Dr. Zweli Mkhize because there is the digital vibe issue hanging over his head? And then I said, why would they vote for the president because there is the Palapala matter hanging over his head? And I said, in both of them, there are allegations, but there are no formal charges. Okay. So if the step-aside resolution doesn't apply to one, it shouldn't apply to the other. And similarly, if it applies to one, it should apply to the other as well.
Let's leave it there. Thanks to both of you, Professors Mngomezulu and Defu. Thank you so much for your time. And that brings us to the end of tonight's episode of the Watchdog. Do join us again tomorrow night, same time. Have a good night.